Good evening. Tonight on a special edition of Newscast, we take a look back at the decade that was, the 1970s. Why, might you ask, are we showing you old clips of things that you've already lived through, while leaving you uninformed about the current news that you really care about? Well, I wish I could say that we here at Channel 4 News are feeling a little nostalgic now that 1979 is coming to a close. But the truth is... Now, let's start our retrospective with a look back at the USSR. Will we learn anything new from this new clip? Old clip? Like what the U in USSR stands for? It's anyone's guess. I got my money on undulating.
Recently, the Soviet Union achieved rough nuclear parity with the United States and surpassed it with the development of the SS-18 missile. Meanwhile, the Cold War gives way to détente and a more complicated pattern of international relations in which the world has no longer clearly split into two clearly opposed blocs. Less powerful countries have more room to assert their independence, and the two superpowers are partially able to recognize their common interest in trying to check the further spread and proliferation of nuclear powers. The Soviet Union has concluded friendship and cooperation treaties with a number of states in the non-communist world, especially among Third World and non-aligned movement states. Moscow advanced state interest by gaining military footholds in strategically important areas throughout the Third World. Furthermore, the USSR continues to provide military aid for the revolutionary movements in the Third World. For all these reasons, Soviet foreign policy is of major importance to the non-communist world and helps determine the tenor of international relations. Although many bureaucracies are involved in the formation and execution of Soviet foreign policy, the many policy guidelines are determined by the Politburo of the Communist Party. The foremost objectives of Soviet foreign policy are the maintenance and enhancement of national security and the maintenance of hegemony over Eastern Europe. Relations with the United States and Western Europe are a major concern to Soviet foreign policy makers, and, much as with the United States, relations with individual Third World states are at least partly determined by the proximity of each state to the border and to estimates of specific significance. And now, over to Phil Harding.
Thank you. So far, the 1970s has been a great decade for technological advances, as in the floppy disk, invented by Alan Shugart, the food processor, the microprocessor, invented by Fagan, Hoffman, Maser, VCR or video cassette, also invented. Another thing was the word processor. Also, the very first video game, Pong. We know, everyone knows that game. I just think that's a riot, don't you?
Yep.
The gene splicing was invented. The post-it note. The laser printer. The inkjet printer. The artificial heart by Jarvik. Cell phones also invented. I think those could be a big hit.
Probably.
Alright. The Walkman was invented. The jumbo jet was also invented. And this airplane could carry 400 people over 5,500 miles. The neutron bomb was also invented. This was a new weapon that made it easier to kill enemy soldiers, even if they were protected. This bomb let out a very small heat blast, but the radiation release was also deadly. Another thing that the radiation could do is that if troops were inside tanks, the steel sometimes reduced the amount of radiation exposed to the troops. The steel sometimes absorbed the radiation from the bomb, and the tank would become more radioactive. Ways that this bomb could be used was also on a Lance missile or dropped by aircraft. And that is all.
In the past decade, the U.S. has had a little trouble with the Middle East. On November 4th, 1979, 500 Muslim students seized the United States Embassy in Iran. Of these 90 people in the embassy, 66 hostages were taken. Out of the original 66 hostages, 14 were released early and 52 were kept. President Carter immediately took action. He imposed a trade embargo against the Iranian oil and put a freeze on Iranian assets in the United States. Iranian diplomats were sent out from the country, and Iranian students were mandated to have their visas checked by the United States government. Although these measures affected the Iranian economy, the non-military efforts had no effect on the hostage situation. Therefore, President Carter decided that it was time to make a rescue attempt to recover the American captives from Iran. Soon after, 8 United States helicopters were sent to a remote staging area known as Desert One. Special forces were brought in by transport planes. However, 3 of the 8 helicopters broke down and were useless in the mission. Carter was forced to cancel the mission because of the lack of transport helicopter available. As the aircrafts were evacuating Desert One, 2 of the aircrafts collided, adding to the failure of the mission. Well, hopefully now we won't have any more trouble with the Middle East. Now to you, Eric Bangert.
It's actually Banger.
My mistake.
We'll be discussing the Watergate break-in. The Watergate scandal in the United States in the 1970s, which was resulting from the break-in into the Democratic National Committee headquarters at the Watergate office complex in Washington, D.C. The effects of the scandal ultimately led to the resignation of the United States President Richard Nixon on August 9, 1974. The affair began with the arrest of 5 men for breaking and entering into Democratic National Committee headquarters at the Watergate complex on June 17, 1972. It was revealed that President Nixon had a tape recording system in his offices that he had recorded many conversations. Recordings from these tapes implicated that the president, revealing they had attempted to cover up the break-in. Nixon resigned the office of the presidency on August 9, 1974. His successor, Gerald Ford, issued a pardon to President Nixon after his resignation.
Latin America
In the midst of a financial crisis, the Latin American countries have reached a point where their foreign debt exceeded their earning power and they are not able to repay it. Early in the 1970s, Latin American countries, notably Brazil, Argentina, and Mexico, borrowed huge sums of money from international creditors for industrialization, especially infrastructure programs.
When the world economy went into a recession earlier this decade and oil prices skyrocketed, it created a breaking point for most countries in the region. Petroleum exporting countries invested their money in international banks, which recycled a major portion of the capital as loans to Latin American governments. Since interest rates have increased here and in Europe, debt payments have also increased, making it harder for borrowing countries to pay back their debts. American governments now owe tremendous quantities of their national currencies, as well as losing purchasing power.
Earlier today, OPEC lifted its trade embargo on the U.S. For those of you who don't know, OPEC is the Organization of Arab Petroleum Exporting Countries. Earlier last year, OPEC placed the embargo upon the U.S. Many speculate this embargo was in direct connection with the U.S.'s connection and alliance with Israel, a common enemy against member nations of OPEC. The embargo itself hit America hard, leading to skyrocketing gas prices, and people from miles around lined up for gas. Fun fact, OPEC spelled backwards, embargo spelled backwards is grab me.